What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G and the TCL Stylus 5G. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 82.5% screen-to-body ratio. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.81-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a 90.2% screen-to-body ratio. So both phones have great displays, and for that matter, they're actually almost the same. But that being said, each phone has its own advantage. On one hand, with the A23 5G, with a 120Hz display versus a standard 60Hz display, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're doing something like watching a video, playing a game, something like that with a lot of motion on the screen, you are going to get a better experience with the A23 5G, and when you're using the phone in general, it's going to feel a little bit more premium. But on the other hand, I feel like the advantages the TCL Stylus 5G has are a little bit more important. First of all, as you can clearly see, the TCL Stylus 5G is a bit larger, and in addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 20:9, the TCL Stylus 5G has a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching a video, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience, and if you're doing something vertical like scrolling through social media or browsing the web, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, despite these displays being really good, I do think the TCL Stylus 5G is overall a little bit better. Now for storage, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the TCL Stylus 5G is getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now keep in mind, technically the international version of the A23 5G does have 128GB too, but since the TCL Stylus 5G is currently only being offered through Metro and T-Mobile, I'm not really going to be counting the international version of the A23 5G in this. But that being said, with 128GB versus 64, the TCL Stylus 5G clearly has an advantage here, so if you are more of a power user, if you're planning on having lots of apps and stuff like that, then I would say the TCL Stylus 5G will be a better choice. But if you're more of a light user and you're not really doing a whole lot with your phone, 64GB, while not being ideal, is still going to be at least acceptable. Now for security features, both phones do have face unlock, as well as fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys, so let's go ahead and give them a try. So starting with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, there we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the TCL Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, these phones both have face unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setups, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a full quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we got a 13 megapixel front facing camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as you can see there, the features are pretty much the same. And same thing for video, both phones have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, you're not really going to go wrong with either phone. But that being said, as far as quality goes, while both phones are really good for what they are, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G does in general take slightly better photos. So if you want the better photo quality between the two, then I personally would go with the A23 5G, but that being said, they're really going to be at the same level. So overall, if you're taking a lot of photos and you want them to look nice, but you don't necessarily need the absolute top of the line quality you would get with something like an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, then you're really not going to go wrong with either phone. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM as well, with the MediaTek Dimensity 700. As far as the performance goes, it's really not going to be that different. They're both typical mid-range 5G phones. They'll be able to do pretty much everything the average user is going to do on a smartphone, but at the same time, they're not going to be nearly as fast as a flagship phone. That being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and here are the scores right here. So as you can see, based on this test, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G as far as performance goes does have a bit of an advantage, but again, in practice, when you're actually using the phones, you're not really going to notice one being significantly faster than the other. Sure, the A23 5G might run stuff like mobile games, for example, a little bit better, but but if you're doing basic activities like web browsing, social media, stuff like that, you honestly won't go wrong with either phone. But that being said, again, of course, if you do want the fastest phone between the two, the A23 5G is going to be it. Now for the batteries, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging, and the TCL Stylus 5G has a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging. So on one hand, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G has pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone, at least in the US, and the TCL Stylus 5G, while not having a terrible battery, definitely doesn't have the biggest battery out there. So if battery life is important to you, definitely keep this in mind, because in that case, the A23 5G will definitely be a much better choice. And in addition to this, when it comes to fast charging, both phones have great charging speeds, but if you have a 25 watt fast charger, the A23 5G will still charge significantly faster. And another thing I do want to point out, you probably already knew this, but neither of these phones have wireless charging, so if you were hoping to get that feature, unfortunately that's not going to be a thing with these phones. But that being said, speaking of other features, one thing these phones both do have is NFC. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, you'll be happy to know you can do that with either of these phones. In addition to this, the TCL Stylus 5G, as the name suggests, does have a stylus, making it pretty much the only mid-range phone besides the Moto G stylus phones that actually has this feature. So if you do want a phone with a stylus, then obviously between the two, the TCL Stylus 5G will be the way to go. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, this is actually really close because each phone does have a couple advantages. On one hand, with the A23 5G, really the biggest advantage of this phone definitely has to be the battery. With a 5000 mAh battery, the battery life on this phone is going to be so much better than the TCL Stylus 5G, and in addition to this, with 25 watt fast charging, with the right fast charger, it will charge up faster as well. In addition to this, as you saw in the Geekbench 5 scores, the A23 5G, while not being that much faster, is still the faster device between the two. And again, I do personally feel like the photo quality is a little bit better on this phone. On the other hand, I do think the TCL Stylus 5G has a better display. Not only is it larger, but it also has better dimensions, and with a taller and more narrow form factor, if you're streaming a lot of videos, for example, I can tell you from experience, you will get a much better experience with this phone. In addition to this, the TCL Stylus 5G also has more storage, and again, as the name of the phone suggests, it does have a stylus, and while the performance isn't quite as good as the A23 5G, it still definitely is pretty fast for what it is, and for the average user, this phone is going to be plenty fast enough to get the job done. But that being said, despite their differences, I do think both of these phones are great options that provide quite a bit of value for the money. At the end of the day, a lot of their specs are so similar that it really is going to come down to what kind of deals you can get. And again, as of the recording of this video, who knows, this might change, but right now, you can really only get the TCL Stylus 5G through Metro or T-Mobile, so if you want to see the latest Metro deals, I will be linking to that in the video description, as well as some information about pricing for both of these phones and my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.